Merry Christmas! This Christmas, I want to make the case that Iron Man 3 is a Christmas movie. Let's talk about it.
I can't sleep. The threat is imminent.
Some people call me a terrorist. I consider myself a teacher.
I am the Mandarin!
We create our own demons.
Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is why I think Iron Man 3 is a Christmas movie. This is my theological analysis this Christmas. Super excited to dive into Iron Man 3, even though I kind of have mixed feelings about it, because I never really liked the twist that Ben Kingsley wasn't really the Mandarin. Why? Because he was so flippin' good. Like, I wanted to see him continue to be the Mandarin and that bad guy be the bad guy to the end. But as it turns out, that twist has a very important to play in Iron Man 3 actually being a Christmas movie. So what is Christmas and what do we celebrate on Christmas that makes Iron Man 3 a Christmas movie? Well, Iron Man 3 does take place in the Christmas season, number one. Number two, the third act of this movie is Christmas Eve, so there's some of those outer reasons why it's a Christmas movie. But look at Christmas, and what do we celebrate? We celebrate John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only son that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. What that means is there is a risk of perishing, and the way to escape that perishing is believing in the Son. Ephesians says that the devil is the prince of the power of the air. And so Jesus, when he was born into enemy-occupied territory. And I love how C.S. Lewis words this in Mere Christianity. He said this: enemy-occupied territory, that is what the world is. Christianity is the story of how the rightful king has landed, you might say, landed in disguise, and is calling us to take part in a great campaign of sabotage. The next thing C.S. Lewis says is pure gold, because he's talking about the human condition. He says this: fallen man is not simply an imperfect creature who needs improvement. He is a rebel who must lay down his arms. To me, that describes Tony Stark in Iron Man 3. Tony's world is enemy-occupied territory. The biggest enemy that has occupied his territory is fear. This fear living in his heart that has him caught in this constant loop of fear. We're fresh out of Avengers, where he saw aliens invade. Beings like Thor actually exist.
Gods, aliens, other dimensions. I'm just a man in a can.
These are things he never would have accounted for in his life, things he never dreamed of as reality. And how do you defend against an enemy that you don't know and that you don't understand?
How did you get out of the wormhole?
Wait a minute, Tony.
So he's scared. And so what does he do? His identity is in that chess piece. His identity is in his suits. It's in his tinkering, because he's constantly running to it for refuge. He even says that in the movie.
I come down here, I do what I know. I tinker. And I have to protect the one thing that I can't live without.
And he runs to his suits as refuge.
My suits, they're
Machines.
part of me.
A distraction.
But the problem is, the more he tinkers, the more he builds, the more he's reminded of that he doesn't know what he's building against or how to fight it, and the more that loop of fear continues to run. But something else that Tony says in Iron Man 3, in that opening monologue, it says he created his own demons. The Bible says God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Tony gave Aldrich Killian authority that he should never have had, by absolutely rejecting that dude just to sleep with a woman. Absolutely rejected that dude in the rudest way possible, to the point where that dude was just ready to dive off a building and end it all.
Well, I considered taking that one-step shortcut to the lobby, if you know what I mean.
But this bitter resolve formed in his heart because of just Tony's utter selfish treatment towards him. Tony gave Aldrich an authority Aldrich never, ever should have had. And then with Maya, what did he do? He gave her the formula so that extremists could, actually work and be starting to be implemented into human beings. He gave that formula. He created demons. He reaped what he sowed in Iron Man 3. And Aldrich Killian is interesting to me because he's basically Tony Stark's Satan. Because what we have is the Mandarin, who supposedly blows up the Chinese theater, and it hurts Happy.
The Chinese theater.
There's no politics here, it's just good old-fashioned revenge.
Now, Tony Stark wants vengeance. All of his hatred, all of his malice is poured towards the Mandarin. And he goes seeking that guy. He is after vengeance. He is going to take down the Mandarin. But Killian says,
I'll have the West's most powerful leader in one hand and the world's most feared terrorist in the other. I'll own the war on terror.
the Mandarin is as fake as those fortune cookies that he was talking about. The Mandarin is not the real villain. He's not the real enemy. He's not the real threat at all. While Tony is blind in his vengeance, going after the fake enemy, Killian is really Satan, who you can't see, who is invisible, who is behind the scenes pulling the strings, and he's going after Tony. He wants vengeance against Tony, but Tony is blindsided because he wants vengeance towards the fake villain, the Mandarin. So Tony's chasing after the wrong thing.
And the thing was, he needed someone to take credit for some accidental explosions.
When Jesus was born into this dark world, a lot of the Israelites believed that the Messiah would come and throw off Rome, that the Messiah would be this military leader. Why? Because Satan was pulling the strings, hiding invisible behind the scenes, getting them all focused on the wrong enemy. So their eyes weren't focused on the truth of the situation. So when the Messiah came, they didn't really recognize him because they were looking the wrong way. And so many of us today are still looking the wrong way because we look at the devil and we have this picture of him, with the pitchfork, the red tights, and the cape, and it's laughable. And he wants us to laugh at him that way, desperately. So that way, we're distracted and we're hating our neighbor or we're fearing whatever, but we're not actually seeing what the real enemy is and what he's really doing underneath. But Jesus came to take on the real enemy. It wasn't to take on Rome. Jesus came to take on the devil and defeat him. Jesus came to defeat death, to defeat hell, to defeat the grave, to defeat sin, so that the real enemy could be thrown off our shoulders so that we could live free by believing in him. And so Tony, throughout Iron Man 3, begins to discover this truth because Iron Man 3 is a story of vulnerability. They took away his suits, they took away his technology because he had been giving so much of his identity towards it. Now what he has to see is that's not where his identity is. What's so interesting about him meeting Harley is that he begins to learn to have the faith of a child, especially in this scene. He's freaking out that his suit isn't charging, again, trying to find his identity there. And then Harley just reminds him, well, aren't you a mechanic? Can't you just make something? And so slowly he begins to learn his identity is not in this chess piece. His identity is not in his suits that he's run to for refuge. They're great tools, but they're not his identity. And in learning what his real identity is, he ends up encountering the Mandarin, finding out the Mandarin is fake and Killian is the real threat and he's been behind everything. So now once he has the truth of the situation, his identity is not in his suits and the Mandarin whom he's hated isn't even a threat at all whatsoever, he now pursues the truth and goes after the real enemy. And you know what's interesting? Who really defeats the Mandarin? It's Pepper. It is Tony's love. Love defeats his enemy. He didn't face Killian alone. He faced the enemy with his love, and his love defeated the enemy. Like I said, Jesus came to defeat the real enemy, which is sin, which is Satan, which is hell, the grave. Jesus came for the real enemy. While the devil wants us looking and hating our neighbor and yet owns us because of the bitterness, because of that hate. While he wants us focused on that object of fear, constantly finding our identity in this loop that we're in and we can't escape it and we don't know why, Jesus came to actually deal with the root of that, and that's what we celebrate at Christmas. We don't have to face the devil in our lives alone. We face him with God. It says God is love. And when we face the devil with God, guess what? We win because God wins. The devil might be the prince of the power of the air, but he's a defeated prince of the power of the air. And that's the whole joy of Christmas, that we believe in the Son. We're not condemned. We are not going to perish because when we believe in him, are set free of that true prison. Where did Iron Man finally find peace in this movie?
Let me tell you, that was the best sleep I'd had in years.
When he literally surrendered his heart by giving up his chess piece. Here he was, a rebel, and finally he laid down his arms. when he laid that down and stopped finding his identity in his suits and surrendered it, he found his true identity in love. And that's what God wants for us this Christmas. That was the whole reason for the birth of Jesus, that in him we can be saved, that in him we would find our true identity and love. We have all kinds of things going on in our hearts and our minds, but we have to remember the real enemy is the one that's invisible, is the one that is the prince of the power of the air that wants to pull the strings. But we also got to know the truth. That enemy was defeated. And now when we believe in Jesus, we have that victory because of his birth and what was initiated that day when he came into enemy-occupied territory. We can now be free because he faced the true enemy, and we could follow him into that freedom. What did you think of Iron Man 3? Do you think Iron Man 3 is a Christmas movie? Let's talk in the comments. And while you're there, hit that subscribe button to become a Durbanian. Hit the bell by the subscribe button so you're notified the next time I do a movie review, ranking video, theological analysis, or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin, wishing you all a very Merry Christmas.